And then eventually he asked me out on a date. And, it's one of those things that looking back, you understand it with more clarity. In the moment, I thought, oh, I'm such a bad person because I don't want to go. I feel sick to my stomach. Like everything in my body is screaming at me right now, like, don't go on this date. And I thought, man, I'm such a bad person. I'm not seeing the good in him. I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm being judgmental. And I just started beating myself up about it, right? I think I was mostly worried about disappointing him or hurting his feelings.
The boy.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, he's already struggling. He's already having a hard time. I don't want to add to that. I don't want to hurt his feelings or make him feel unworthy or less than or judged. So I'll go on this date. And I just thought, I'm going to throw up. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck here with him. I felt like I couldn't say anything. And I continued the whole date all the way until midnight. And that wasn't the only event throughout the day and the night that he tried things. And I just wish I could go back to that moment and give myself some strength that I've learned now and understanding.
In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self-harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stauffer. I'm excited to introduce to you my dear friend, Katie Ball. Welcome to our podcast, Katie. How are you?
Thanks, Eric. I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Good. Let's start with telling our listeners a little bit about you.
Sure. Let's see. I'm currently a therapist, and I have 3 amazing sons. They're the best part of my life. I'm married, and I like flower arranging and reading a good book, going to the beach, and eating good food.
Yeah. So
That's
the
lame.
flower arranging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you do a lot of that, right?
I do. I also own a flower shop here in town. So when I'm not doing therapy, you can find me at the flower shop.
Does it smell like flowers all the time in there?
It does, but I can't smell it anymore. People
so
always
used
come
to
in
it.
and say, it smells so good in here, and I can't smell it
You're just
anymore.
acclimated to it.
Uh-huh.
How long have you owned that business now?
17 years. But
That's
I've worked
awesome.
there for 25 years.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing therapy now as a therapist?
Let's see. I think 3 years. About 3 years.
What has that brought into your life doing that?
Oh, it's actually the amazing job. It's so cool to be such a small part of someone's like amazing transformation and to take something that's so painful and hurting so much and see the hope that shines through and like coming out on the other side. To be a small part of that is kind of sacred.
Yeah. Well, and we're, obviously, for our listeners that don't know, you're a part of Pause Wellness now.
I am.
And how long have you been with us?
Let's see. I started in February, so 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, that's great. So you've got some experience with therapy, and you've got the flower shop. What drew you to Pause Wellness, by the way?
Well, part of something that's really been a strength to me in my life is faith. And I've noticed doing therapy that spirituality is kind of skipped over, but it's a huge part of healing. And so I was really drawn by the mission of Pause Wellness. Also, you guys have the Missionary Wellness Center, and I have 2 sons that have been missionaries or going to be missionaries. So that's been on my mind, and I really wanted to be a part of that as well.
Yeah. One thing that you and I have been really excited about is we're going to be doing the Missionary Wellness Center podcast, Ever Onward. We've already got a couple of those episodes recorded, and they have yet to be released, but those will be coming out. So we're excited for our listeners to discover that element, the new podcast.
Yeah, stay tuned. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's so great. It's been fun. Well, okay, why don't we dive into your story? Some of our listeners might be thinking, well, if you're a therapist with Pause, maybe you're on here to just share some therapy side of things. but you're actually here to share your own story.
I
And so
am.
let's dive into that. Where would you like to start with your story?
I think I'll probably just kind of talk about how I became the people pleaser that I've been trying to not be. It's kind of, I was thinking about it. It's a little bit of a perfect storm of a few different things. I think I was kind of born really sensitive. So I think that kind of set me up to be a people pleaser. I loved making people happy. I grew up in kind of a dysfunctional house where I kind of was the parent to my parents. So I think I just sunk into that role of like taking care of others, putting other people's needs above my own, making sure everybody's okay. And it just, from the time I was very small, that was who I was. That was very much my identity.
What was it about, if you don't, maybe it's too personal of a question, but what was it about the dynamic of your home that put you in a position like that?
Yeah, my dad was an alcoholic and he wasn't home very much. There was some abuse going on, like physical abuse and verbal abuse from my dad. And then when I was 8, my mom separated from him. And she had to work a lot to provide financially for us. So I kind of just took over, like taking care of the house, taking care of my little brother. I remember like doing his homework with him and reading him stories, tucking him in at night, but also just being so worried about my poor mom. She was under so much stress. And just, I remember just, even though I was little, I was like, what can I do to help my mom? Like, how can I help her life be better?
Wow. How old were you when you started kind of having that desire, do you think? At very early? We talking like
Yeah.
7, 6, something like that?
Probably early. Like, I remember not wanting to go to kindergarten because I was afraid, like, well, who will take care of people while I'm at school? Like, I felt like I couldn't leave home because who was going to do that if I wasn't there? Who's going to make sure everything was okay?
And where did you fit? You have siblings?
Yeah, I have 2 older brothers that are quite a bit older than me. They're 10 and 13 years older than me. And then I have one younger brother that's 7 years younger than me.
So you kind of had this almost maternal opportunity at a very young age.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily resent it. I mean, it was hard and it set me up for some struggles, which we'll get to. But it was also kind of a beautiful time to be able to serve my family and love my little brother in that way.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question was, did you feel pressure to do this? Or did you feel like, did you do it begrudgingly? Or was that just a part of your nature and you enjoyed this
Yeah.
aspect of your life?
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't that my mom put that pressure on me. I put it on myself. I think I just saw suffering in my home and just, I don't know what it was, but I was like, I have to relieve it. I have to fix it. I have to do something. I never did it begrudgingly. I think I was stressed because sometimes I was trying to solve big problems that were bigger than a little girl could solve.
Yeah.
But the pressure definitely came from within myself.
How did your mom probably noticed this ability that you had or this tendency that you had? Was she expressive of like gratitude? Did some of that gratitude add to more pressure? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah.
The only reason I'm asking, just maybe a little background on this, is my oldest daughter, Jenny, she's very capable. And it was very convenient to have a daughter that was that capable as the first child. And what my wife and I didn't realize is how much pressure we were putting on her by asking her to do so many things because it was so helpful to us, right?
Sure.
And then because she was so helpful, we expressed a lot of gratitude, like, thank you so much. You're so capable. You can do so many things, which what we didn't realize until now, we're just learning that created this set of expectation or almost like it reinforced a perfectionism and people pleasing in her. Did you
Definitely.
experience something like that with your mom where you were so helpful to her?
Yeah. And she's well meaning. I don't think she ever really realized long term what that would look like for me to fit that role of the fixer. But yeah, she definitely would. Oh, thank you so much. I don't know what I would do without you. You're a lifesaver. And, not just with my mom, but in life in general, when you're a person who people pleases and has very little boundaries, it's very positively reinforcing. People love you. You get that rush of helping people. it's very kind of addicting, actually, to be a people pleaser. And it's so rewarding that when you try to unwind that and start living a different way, it's pretty difficult.
So did you kind of create this reflected sense of self, like if I'm pleasing people, they appreciate it, and thus that means I'm good
Yes.
and I'm okay? Or like it wasn't that you were self-validating, it was you would only feel validated unless others were validating you.
No, I think it was more the first one.
Really?
I wanted to be a good person, and if I could relieve suffering, then I was a good person. But I was biting off more than I could chew, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it worked for a while for you. You felt like it was quite functional.
Yeah, I lived that way for a long time.
How did that change?
Well, I
Or
think,
when did you recognize that it was a problem? Were there events that led to that, or?
you know, ironically, I don't think I realized it was a problem until I was in the middle of my 30s. There were some pretty big moments before that happened that kind of culminated that I was like, oh, yeah, this is not healthy. This is not a healthy way to continue living. But I didn't start breaking it down and trying to live a different way until like 35.
So what were some of the events that led to that conclusion later in life?
Yeah, I think the biggest one happened when I was in high school. It's kind of the thing that sticks out the most to me, something I wish I could, the question, if you had a time machine and go back and do something differently, this is definitely a moment I would like to revisit and do differently. But I was 16 and I was like a youth leader in my church congregation. And there was a young man in my church congregation that was kind of, not coming to church, kind of maybe getting into some trouble. Like it felt like the leaders and the grown-ups kind of in my life felt like he was slipping away. And they asked me if I would kind of befriend him and see if I could help him in somehow. And so I decided that I would. And I started talking to him and trying to be his friend and things like that. And then eventually he asked me out on a date. And, it's one of those things that looking back, you understand it with more clarity. In the moment, I thought, oh, I'm such a bad person because I don't want to go. I feel sick to my stomach. Like everything in my body is screaming at me right now, like, don't go on this date. And I thought, man, I'm such a bad person. I'm not seeing the good in him. I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm being judgmental. And I just started beating myself up about it, right? Thinking that I was the problem.
So you weren't feeling like those were red flags. You were thinking, I'm being judgmental or I'm being unkind.
Yes.
So you were almost placing a worthiness factor into this, even though they were probably red flags that were going off.
Yeah, because I think up to that point, being the people pleaser and doing things like that for others was pretty easy. It didn't take a lot of sacrifice. I wasn't really in harm's way, but I think this was the first moment in my life that started to change that for me.
So did you feel some added pressure to be engaged in this, going on this date, because you had kind of either been counseled or been invited by church leaders to help kind of fellowship this individual?
Maybe a little bit. I think I was mostly worried about disappointing him or hurting his feelings.
The boy.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, he's already struggling. He's already having a hard time. I don't want to add to that. I don't want to hurt his feelings or make him feel unworthy or less than or judged. So I'll go on this date with him.
See, that's such a tough thing. How do you know how to balance the line between kindness and healthy boundary? I mean, sometimes our motive is totally pure and totally kind, and you wouldn't think that could lead to something that could be detrimental to us or unhealthy in some way, and that is a tough thing to figure out.
It is tough. I've come a long way from this 16-year-old girl that I'm talking about, but I still struggle with it. It's not a definite line. I think it takes some soul searching and some struggle to figure it out.
Well, I'm kind of jumping the gun here. Tell us a little more. So what happened? So you knew and felt like you shouldn't go on this date, but I'm assuming you did.
I did. And the date was to go snowmobiling and then go out to dinner and then go to this school dance. So he said he'd pick me up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be with him all day, like from 7 a.m. to midnight, probably. I was like, okay, it's fine. You're going to be fine. You know, all my red flags and all my intuition, I just kept shoving it down and guilting myself over it. So we went snowmobiling and we were in a group. There was 4 of us, like 2 couples. And along the way, he like veered off from the group and wasn't with them anymore. And my heart just started panicking. But again, instead of saying, hey, no, go back. I mean, I had no boundaries. I had no voice. I just thought, oh, give him the benefit of the doubt. It'll be fine. Like, don't hurt his feelings. So he went off from them to the secluded place.
Yeah.
Then he kind of like, he stopped the snowmobile and he acted like he was kind of playfully throwing me in the snow. But then he got on top of me. And at this point, I had never held hands with a boy. I had never kissed a boy. I was very innocent when it came to stuff like that. And I just froze. Like, I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. It was the weirdest thing. You would think you would fight. You know, you imagine what you would do in a situation like that. And I didn't do anything like I thought I would.
So you had all these red flags going into it, warning signs, and you probably felt things. And then you're in that moment where for a lot of people it's fight or flight or freeze, and you experience the freeze.
Yeah.
From that.
Yeah.
Were you afraid?
I was terrified.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just I remember I turned my head to the side and I just kind of closed my eyes and said a prayer to God that those people would notice we were gone, that the other couple or that something would happen, that somebody would come, right? And a few minutes later, the other couple realized we were gone, turned around and followed the tracks. And when he heard the snowmobile coming, he, jumped up, got off of me. And then we got back on the snowmobile and I just thought, I'm going to throw up. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck here with him. I felt like I couldn't say anything. And I continued the whole date all the way until midnight. And that wasn't the only event throughout the day and the night that he tried things. And I just wish I could go back to that moment and give myself some strength that I've learned now and understanding.
So that's an interesting way to put it. Like, it's like you want to retroactively go back and give yourself that strength. But since you didn't at that time, and again, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but how have you given that former person more grace in your life and gentleness and kindness that probably, I hear the story for the first time here and my heart just breaks for you. I just think this poor girl who, I know the heart. I as I've gotten to know you, I just know your good heart. And to think that good heart was manipulated and abused in such a way is it's soul crushing.
Yeah.
So how have you been able to recover from this?
There's a couple things. One is that I've realized that my worth is not based on what helping others, all of it. It's still a big part of who I am, and I will never abandon that because that's one of my core values. But I've learned to manage it in a healthier way and understand there's limits. And, I used to think the definition of selfish was you're selfish if you put your needs above others. Well, that's a really hard way to live, right? And I had internalized that. I can't put my needs above others ever. And now I realize that the definition of selfish is doing what's best for you with no regard for anyone else. So in that definition, you realize I can come up to a situation, I can have regard and respect and love and benefit of the doubt for other people, and I can still choose what's best for me. And that's not selfish. So I've come to understand that. I've realized that my worth is like tethered and tied to something so much bigger in my faith than making other people happy. And that gives me the courage to disappoint people that I never had before.
Yeah, there's a commonly known set of verses in the New Testament among Christianity that they know that the great commandments. The first is love God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength, and the second is like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. And oftentimes we take that second one and we think, love thy neighbor as thyself means put thy neighbor ahead of thyself.
Yeah.
But what it really means is you can't really love your neighbor unless you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to know how to love unless you respect yourself and can set those healthy boundaries. And maybe you know this better than me because you're a therapist, but for me, it was so hard to become someone who set healthy boundaries as a people pleaser myself that it was because it felt like as I'm setting a healthy boundary, I'm actually being more selfish.
Mm-hmm.
It's like to differentiate means I'm pulling away. To differentiate means I'm giving someone a cold shoulder. And so it's hard to not feel sinful.
It's really hard
when you're wanting to learn how to have self-love.
Yeah.
And how to set those boundaries. Did you experience the same thing? And maybe you still are, like you're kind of saying,
yes.
Right?
I'm a work in progress. Like I said, I've come a long ways, but I still catch myself in those people-pleasing loops. It's a constant thing I'm working on. One thing that really helped me is that along with my faith, I really want to be Christ-like. I really love my Savior and I want to live as he did. And I think for a while I focused on things in a maybe immature or way that didn't encompass the full understanding. Like I heard things like turn the other cheek, love your neighbors, be a peacemaker, things like that. So I thought, okay. And I internalized that, like I say, in an immature way. Like that means don't put your needs above others. Don't set boundaries. Don't disappoint people. Don't make people angry, you know? But now I realize that one of the names for our Savior is advocate. And I think that's so powerful to realize that he is advocating for us. So why wouldn't we advocate for ourselves? And if you study the scriptures, there are times in the Bible that he advocates for himself. He's in a crowd of people and everybody wants him. Everybody wants to be healed. Everybody wants him. And he withdraws himself to pray and take time with his Father. And I think it's okay that we care about ourselves too, because when we care about ourselves, we're able to care about each other even more.
You know, that makes me ponder about something I don't know that I've really fully considered before, but perhaps I've always seen the Savior as someone who subjected himself to abuse and murder ultimately. But maybe that wasn't what was happening. Maybe he wasn't saying, I'm going to let these people abuse me and kill me. Maybe he needed to go to those lengths to pay the price.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that doesn't mean that he's telling us we need to subject ourselves to such treatment.
Right.
That we can advocate for ourselves. Because he clearly had the power to not let that happen.
Yeah.
I mean, if this person can raise people from the dead and walk on water, surely he could have stopped a couple of spears and, being imprisoned or whatever it was that he had to go through.
Yeah.
So maybe he intentionally did so to pay a price rather than just make himself a victim of abuse.
I think so. And there were times where he knew he was in danger or harm could come from the Pharisees and he withdrew himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have come to realize that, turning the other cheek, being a peacemaker, loving your enemies, those are true principles. And I think that he gave them to us to teach us we don't treat people harshly or cruelly. it doesn't mean that we throw ourselves under the bus and let people walk all over us and treat us harshly.
Yeah.
And so I've just come to understand that on a deeper level and kind of partnership with Christ, and realize in what ways do I need to advocate for myself. And there have been some key moments where it was like a lightning bolt moment where I was like, oh, I understand.
Is there one you could share, one you want to point out with that?
Sure. I think there's two big ones. I think this evolution, is tiny baby steps, and then there were a couple big leaps. One was 1 year. I remember it was kind of trendy to pick like a word of the year instead of like make a list of affirmations or goals or whatever. But I thought, okay, I'm going to pick the word enough. And I thought in the moment, this was in my 30s. This is what kind of started it all. I thought, okay, I have two goals. On the one hand, I'm going to start believing that I'm enough. I'm smart enough. I'm good enough. I'm pretty enough. I'm skinny enough. I'm enough. And I'm going to start believing it. And then on the other hand, I thought, okay, and I'm going to start saying enough. Like, I'm going to start setting boundaries. I'm going to start advocating for myself. And I thought they were two separate goals. But the more that I worked on them and the more that I practiced them, I remember looking back at the end of the year and realizing that was the same goal. Because when I believed that I was enough, then I was able to say, okay, enough. And vice versa. They strengthened each other and they needed each other. So that was kind of the first big push. But then when it came time, so that was helping me believe it. Then it came to living it. And that was so much harder. Especially when you're used to being positively reinforced for being a people pleaser, it's really hard to go without that. But I found this affirmation that said, when I'm tempted to shrink, I choose to expand. And that just kind of like pierced my soul. I even made a necklace and it said expand in Morse code, and I wore it every day. And when I was tempted to shrink and not stand up for myself, not advocate for myself, not love myself in situations, I would force myself to expand. And I read all sorts of books about healthy communication and being assertive, not aggressive. And I just really studied hard to try to make sure that the way I was coming across was healthy and like I would be proud of.
Yeah.
And then I tried to live it. And those two things were very powerful leaps in my journey.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. In my interactions with you, just over the short time that I've known you, you come across to me as a very happy, sweet, optimistic, positive individual by nature. It seems like that is like the people pleasing side of you is not a surprise to me because it does seem like you genuinely want to help people.
Yeah.
Not even just please people. You just want to help. You seem like a helper to me. So as you learn to advocate for yourself and to expand yourself, or to get the courage to say when something was enough, did that come as a stark contrast to your general nature, that people were like, whoa, what's wrong with Katie? Wow, someone just made her really mad, or something like that?
Yeah.
Because I could imagine it being a contrast strong enough as you're learning to balance that. Did you experience that?
Yeah, there's I noticed kind of whiplash around me. But what was interesting is, I did lose some people from my life throughout this transition. Not very many, but I did. And it helped me understand that the people who had the most to gain from me not having any boundaries were the ones who only wanted to keep me around because I didn't have any. And the ones who really loved me and cared about me, they did the work with me. At first they were like, I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know why you're so different, but let's work this out. Let's figure it out. And it was really cool to see the people who really loved me.
That is a very damning statement, right? That, and I don't mean that harshly. I just think it's awesome. I think it's so powerful that those who only wanted me in their life because I didn't have any boundaries. That's something to really pay attention to. Because if we are one who won't advocate for ourselves, then we're actually shortchanging our relationships. Our relationships are not as authentic as they could be. And then you say you saw people who are willing to do the work with you.
Yeah.
They were by your side and they're cheering you on. They're willing to adapt to help you get to a more healthy spot for yourself.
Yeah. And I think you're able to be that healthy people pleaser in your life, fill that role that's, important to me with the people who really love me. Whereas the people who maybe didn't love me, I felt like a gerbil on one of those wheels, just running, never actually helping them, never actually pleasing them or getting anywhere, but this desperate, urgent, anxiety-ridden feeling of just running on a wheel. But then when I was able to set those healthy boundaries and surround myself with healthy people, I'm still a people pleaser.
Yeah.
I'm still a helper, but not to the extent of like damaging myself anymore.
Yeah. And the great thing too, if you are a people pleaser by nature, but you learn how to set healthy boundaries and advocate for yourself, that means that when you do choose someone, you're doing it with much more intention than just to be the people pleaser. Because you're going, I've got this healthy boundary and I'm still choosing you.
Yeah.
That's something my wife and I have learned as we've learned how to do this better, is that it actually makes the love that much stronger because we're setting the boundaries, and then it's the relationship space that we have chosen to agree upon that becomes that much more intentional.
Yeah.
And more powerful that way.
Yeah.
Can I read a quote to you?
Of course.
I usually don't bring up my phone on the podcast, but I saw this one last night, and it applies so much to what we've talked about. But it's Jennifer Finlayson Fife. Are you familiar with her?
Yes.
She's a Latter-day Saint therapist, and I think she gains a lot of traction because of her great wisdom. But she said this: "You have a right to set boundaries, but others will cross them. Boundaries are not about controlling another person. They are about determining who you are going to be in the face of the actions of others."
Yeah.
Determining who you are going to be in the face of the action of others. So what has that done for you? How did that help you determine who you were going to be in the face of others by learning to advocate for yourself?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't end up, becoming the opposite of what I was. I was able to kind of harness it and understand it on a purer level. I'm still that person, but I'm not suffering and I'm not in danger. I'm not going to get hurt as much, So I don't know. I haven't changed that much. I've just understood things on such a deeper level that helped me make better choices in relationship circumstances. And I think above all, the best thing that I've learned is just that, like, I'm worth it.
Yeah.
I could have disappointed him and that would have been okay. I could have not gone on that date and I still would have been a good person. I could have yelled at him and I still would have been a good person.
Could have kicked him and
Yeah.
still would have been a good person.
Yeah. And I guess that's why I have that moment, like I said, where I want to go back to that girl who didn't think she was worth it. It breaks my heart to think that she didn't think she was worth disappointing someone, because I absolutely am worth it.
Yeah.
And I know that now, but I didn't know that then.
Yeah. So maybe I asked this earlier, but so do you feel like these experiences that you had led you to want to go into therapy and be a therapist for others?
I think partially, it was also that need. I want to relieve suffering. I want to help people. And once I learned these mental health tools, like once I went to therapy and read books about healthy communication and boundaries, to see how much it helped me heal and transform my life, I thought, I got to share this with everybody.
Yeah.
I got to go tell people about this. And if I can relieve my suffering, think of how much suffering I can relieve if I go share it with others.
See, that's the thing. I respect the notion that people want to keep their privacy on things, and I'm, by no means am I saying everyone should broadcast their stories, but that's what I love about this podcast, is that there is so much power in that if I can help illustrate a circumstance that has these thinking errors or that led to pain, and I've had to work through these things. The data is the proof. The proof is right there in the pudding, right? It's like,
Yeah.
this actually worked. I was able to get through this because of these principles. And by you having the courage to come on and share that, you're only enabling other people to discover those same things.
I hope so. In my first my first year or two of being a therapist, I worked with sexual assault victims, and I was an advocate at the hospital when they would come in for their exam. And that was really, empowering for me to be able to be on that other side, to know what it was like to feel like that girl that had no voice, that couldn't do anything and was completely helpless, and then be that person to hold that other girl's hand and say, you got this, you're going to be okay. And that was a really cool experience.
Yeah, that's poetic. So how have you found that these experiences have changed the way or helped you be the mother and the wife that you are? How has it impacted your family relationships?
Yeah, I think it's definitely helped me the most as a mom. I think that, kind of as you mentioned, it's really easy to take advantage of the kids who are the good kid, and praise them when they're happy and when they're cooperative, and try to hurry past the difficult emotions. But I want my kids to know without a doubt that I am here for them, good and bad. I'm here for them when they want to cry, when they want to yell, when they want to throw things, and that they're worth it. They're allowed to have bad days, and they're allowed to have difficult feelings because they're worth it. So I think that that's helped a lot. And then I'm trying to help them do boundaries. Bless their hearts. They're a lot like me, and they have hearts of gold, and they tend to let people boss them around. So I'm trying to help them learn things that I wished I had learned at their age. But man, they're wonderful.
One thing I've noticed as a parent that I might think that my motive is really golden when they're having a hard time and I want to rush them past the hard time, because I think I'm just trying to help you not have pain. But if I'm really being honest, and if I slow that way down, it's probably me wanting to avoid my discomfort or my inconvenience by their sadness and pain.
Yeah.
And so I'm almost giving them the impression that they should not be comfortable with their sadness or their pain. They should not. And so they should soothe me by moving forward quickly. So that you don't inconvenience me,
Yeah.
And that's a tough realization to come to as a parent, or to be willing to admit.
And hard to not do. Like growing up, I remember my mom would always say, don't make waves, which meant don't express anything inconvenient or that's going to upset anyone. So I just shoved everything down. Unless it was positive, happy, sugar-coated, I just pretended it didn't exist. And conveniently, as a mom, that would be great if my kids did that. But I don't want them to. I want them to express all emotions to me. I want them to be authentic and know that it's okay. I'm here for it.
As you have grown in your through these experiences that you've had, has it changed the way that you saw the way you saw your parents and what their efforts were to raise you?
Yeah, I think, that's a whole process of itself. Luckily, I think I'm at a point now where I do believe that they did the best that they could with the addictions and circumstances and knowledge that they had in the moment. So I have made peace with it. I don't want to raise my kids the same way.
Right.
I don't want to repeat those mistakes, but I've made peace with it. I don't think my mom especially knew what parentifying me, what effect that would have on me. I think she thought, she's great. She's put together. She can handle anything. I don't have to worry about her. When in reality, I needed someone to worry about me.
Parentifying. There's a term to remember. Yeah, I think that's what we did with Jenny. We parentified her. And in a way, we rob her childhood. We rob so much of that discovery adventure of youth
Mm-hmm.
by parentifying. And
Yeah.
man, that's a tough pill to swallow. Yeah. Um, as you think about our listeners and people who maybe interact with individuals like you who have a tendency to be people pleasers, how can we educate those who might unknowingly be taking advantage of people pleasers to recognize, hey, let's not do that. Let's actually help them from themselves in a way.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can do that?
I think maybe picking up on some cues if they never say no to anything, that's a pretty big clue that something might be going on. If they're hard on themselves, if they're always making fun of themselves or like putting themselves down, and you sense that their self-worth maybe isn't what it should be, do everything you can to empower them and help them believe in themselves, because that's really powerful. Once they know they're worth it, then they can change. But until they know that they're worth it, they're going to keep repeating.
Mm-hmm. Have you come up with some good strategies for setting healthy boundaries or not agreeing to do everything that comes your way?
One thing that I do that helps me is I still have that pull to do everything for everyone all the time. So I'll pause and I'll ask myself, am I doing this out of fear or am I doing it out of love? And if I'm doing it out of fear, then I know that I'm stuck in that people pleasing loop. And I have my affirmations that I tell myself. I pray. I have some strengthening behaviors that like help me feel grounded. And then I choose not to do things out of fear anymore. And it's not about the behavior necessarily. Like, it's not like these behaviors I don't do anymore. These are fear-based and these are love-based. It could be the same thing day to day, but some days I'm operating out of fear and some days I'm operating out of love.
That's a great tip. You've got so many good tips. I just want to take note on every one of these things. So it's so great. Oftentimes I think if I'm asked to do something and I've got room in my schedule, that's the sign to me that I'm supposed to do it because there's room in the schedule. But if I'm being really honest, if I were to do that for everything that I get invited to do, there is no room in the schedule. I would just run myself into the ground. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I think it was my father-in-law taught me is that sometimes we have to say we have an appointment, even if that appointment is nothing.
Yeah.
Even if that appointment is, I'm going to sit on my couch and relax for an hour. It's not to induce laziness. It's simply because we need to be fed.
Yeah.
We need nourishment, and we cannot do this to ourselves over and over. And in a culture of religion, of service, that is kind of an institutional hazard that we might find ourselves hurting the ones that we love the very most by trying to satisfy the ones that we only interact with very little.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned studying the scriptures and learning about the life of Christ has helped me. And another example you made me think of is I was reading a blog by I think he was a Catholic priest, and he was mentioning that story of when he realizes that Mary and Martha are calling for him to come to Lazarus, and he waits. And he said that sometimes we say no so that we can say yes to bigger things in the future, that miracle of raising him from the dead was a bigger yes because he said no. And I think sometimes in our life, we think we have to say a million little yeses, but sometimes we say no so something bigger can happen.
Oh, that's really, really good. Yeah, I remember a church leader coming to our local congregation one time visiting, and he said that he and his wife noticed that there was a lot of contention in the home, and they were, fighting and bickering, the kids, and just a lot of arguing. You know how families are. It just gets that way. But then when a stranger or a neighbor, someone would come to visit, it was like everyone put on these sweet voices and everybody started acting like all was well. And we would never talk to these strangers the way that we were talking to each other. And they stopped and they, the mom and the dad, and they were like, we've got that backwards. why are we willing to treat these strangers who, we care about, but they're not the highest on our priority list?
Yeah.
Why are we willing to treat them like absolute gold, but the ones that matter the very most to us, we're willing to just absolutely trash?
Mm-hmm.
And they thought, we gotta switch that around somehow. And so they counseled together as a family, like, how can we reverse that? How can we prioritize, put first things first in our life, so
Yeah.
that we stop people pleasing those
Yeah.
that don't matter as much. I mean, no offense to everyone else, but
Sure.
my wife matters to me more than anyone else, and then it's my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I shouldn't feel bad about that.
Yeah. And ourselves, a lot of times we treat everybody else like gold, but we beat
Yes.
up on ourselves.
Yeah. You have so much to share. I just want to pick your brain. So are there any other things, if you're thinking about these listeners that that maybe have thinking errors as well, anything else stick out to you? Anything you'd want them to walk away with from hearing your story?
I think I'd like to share my story today to help people who maybe felt like I used to, that my only worth was, serving and giving to other people, and that you can keep that part of you, but do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice yourself, and that it's worth the work. Being someone who lived that life for a long time. I've only been out of it for a very short time. I made a professional career out of living that certain way. But it's worth every heartache, every hard boundary that I set. I'm so much freer now. And it's interesting because if you looked at me on the outside, I don't look that much different. I don't even act that much different. But how I feel on the inside and the peace that I carry with me, that's what's different.
Oh, that's amazing. I think it's in Matthew somewhere where the Lord instructs that he who seeketh himself will lose it, but he who loses himself for my sake shall find it. And that can seem a little bit counterintuitive to the message that we're sharing today. So how do we reconcile that counsel? He that loseth himself for my sake, the Savior's sake, will find it. How do you do that without losing yourself like we've been talking about? Do you get what I'm asking?
Definitely. And I think that's another one of those things that sometimes we
Misinterpret,
misunderstand.
yeah.
Yeah. I think, the story of the 99 and 1, we always think that the 1 is someone else, but the 1 might be us. So if we help and people please and serve and sacrifice ourself and our mental health and everything about us for 99 people, Christ would still come after us for the 1. And like I said, he is our advocate and he wants us to advocate for ourselves. So I think losing our life doesn't mean like losing ourselves. Maybe it means like finding ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
So that we can help more people.
Yeah, I think a common thing that we think of with the word pride being this universal selfishness sin, right? But self-love is a completely different concept than pride.
Right.
Pride is when we put ourselves above all other things in a way that is selfish. What was it that you said earlier about selfishness?
It's like selfish is doing what's best for you with no regard.
No regard for other people.
Mm-hmm.
But we can absolutely care for ourselves and love ourselves and still hold regard for other people.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's the losing ourselves that Jesus is inviting us to do in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
That we'll find that joy because we love ourselves, but we also hold regard for others in a healthy way.
Definitely.
Man. Well, thank you so much, Katie. I admire you. I respect you so much for sharing this story and what you've been through. Are there any other thoughts that you've been pondering that you want to conclude with today?
I think, can I end with a quote?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, let me find it. Okay, I love this quote about Christ and setting boundaries. It said Christ navigated the delicate balance between being assertive and compassion. It's crucial to understand that setting boundaries and being assertive align with Christ's teachings, which advocate for both selflessness and standing up for what's just.
That's great. We can strike that balance. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Appreciate you, Katie. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.